Friends, we've got lots of beautiful words here, and the danger with beautiful words is that we can just gloss over them, think we've received something because it's like a lovely song, and miss what it's really about. 2/3 of the New Testament is filled with letters from Paul. These letters are spiritual instructions to his spiritual children. Paul was the mystic, the first one to play that role of expanding Christ's mission out to the world, without whom we would not be here, because the first disciples thought it was a Jewish sect. They didn't get it. Paul was inspired by the resurrected Christ to go into all the world and to teach and to help us become that which Christ calls us to be. So, my hope today is to take these pretty words and turn them into specific instructions for your life right now. You've heard me say it a million times, but there's something extra here today with Thanksgiving. The cornucopia, which goes back to Zeus and some Greek mythology, but it represents harvest. We know it represents our forebearers, if you will, the Puritans, the beginning. And I just want to make the point, as I seek to do on most Thanksgivings, that this moment of Thanksgiving that has come down to us was after the harshest winter they had had in that part of the world in ages. There was still the little ice age, I'm told. I've shared with some of you that I had relatives there, maybe you did too. And my relative, through my great-great-great-great-grandmother in New England, was Miles Standish, the captain of the Mayflower. Why do I say that? Because his beloved wife Rose, who came with him along with 17 other wives to the new world, to the new beginning, to the freedom of living a new life, had died just before Thanksgiving, as did those 17 other women. So these people had suffered greatly, were still in mourning, and yet they gave thanks. It would be silly to leave that out of this picture, wouldn't it? No matter how great the harvest was, no matter how they managed to get along with the Native Americans, there was grief of heart, and yet they gave thanks. Let that stick in your mind, because that is at the heart of this particular teaching, which is jammed with information. So dear Paul tells us for all time, not the folks in a particular church at a particular time, tells us now out of his revelations that he has not ceased praying for us. And don't you doubt, you 21st century rationalists, that there are prayers made for us in another dimension. And he continues to pray that you may be filled with the knowledge of God's will in all spiritual understanding. Now that could be a bunch of platitudes. You dig into what that means. The prayer for each person, whatever you want to label yourself, a disciple, a Christian, a seeker, is to be filled with the knowledge of God's will. He wants that kind of complete imbuing of the knowledge of God's will for each one of us. And the knowledge of God's will in Greek is epinosis, which doesn't mean information or intellectual adherence or saying yes to a creed or dogma. Epinosis means practical experience of God. He is praying that you will discover practical, tangible experience of the reality of God. So much so that it fills your life. This is a prayer for transformation, because most of us don't spend much time trying to be filled with that kind of knowledge. We're too busy making it on our own. It's very hard to depend on the Holy One. I'm sure everybody here, even you happy singers, have had hard times. It's part of being human. And in those hardest of times, to trust in the goodness of God anyway is very difficult. It's going against the rational mind. It's going against perhaps what your peers are saying. And yet, this is what we are called to be. To know that the will of God, the goodness of God, can be lived out and save us from our miseries. With all spiritual wisdom and understanding, the Amplified Bible says, in comprehensive insight into the ways and purposes of God. Comprehensive insight into the purposes and ways of God, the uncreated one. That's a tough one. That's getting cosmic. You got to go big picture. And surely you know that sometimes the best way to help your pain, do we all know that? The answer to that is help somebody else. That's one. Another way is to have some relativity, some larger picture of reality. But don't you see that if each of us is just locked in on our particular problem, we can't get out of it. And he goes on to say again, specific teachings. I'm going to give you 4 steps because we humans love those 7 steps to success, 10 steps to losing weight, right? Those books sell like crazy. So he gives us 4 instructions in this letter to lead lives worthy of God, pleasing to God. Now understand this. What does it mean to live lives worthy? Well, first of all, it means that we can live lives that are unworthy and unpleasing to God. Good luck with that. And you know that there's a whole lot of people out there for whom that is the way of life. And all of us are always on that edge where we have to make that choice. Because an unworthy life, a life that does not seek to please the higher, the good, and the beautiful, the pure, the right, is going to go the other direction, into outer darkness and meaninglessness. We are given saving instructions to keep us from that. He goes on to say, so that too you may bear fruit in every good work. And as Westerners, we assume that means that we do stuff. And it's good to do things. I'm a doer kind of guy. Some of us like to really be can-do people. But this is not about doing, this is about being. Because what is the fruit he's talking about? The fruit of Holy Spirit. Remember what that is? Love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, gentleness, humility, faithfulness, self-control. That's bearing fruit in the Spirit. Can you imagine if we lived that way? What wonderful people we would be. Every time we get together, we would soak it in. I don't think we're far from that, friends. You know, I often give sermons that are hard-hitting, but this place is a beautiful place with beautiful people. We are very lucky because there's a whole mess of churches out there that are filled with toxic energy and nastiness and all that is ungodly, and will certainly lead to their demise. We attract Holy Spirit into this place by living these instructions, remembering what the knowledge of God is, filling ourselves with it, not leaving it in the sanctuary when we walk out the door. And then he says, may you be made strong with all the strength that comes from his glorious power. Another sentence that is so pretty you could just walk right past it. Made strong with his strength. In other words, we are not expected to do this by ourselves. When you are down for the count, you are not expected to get back up by yourself. And you may have plenty of willpower, but sometimes life just breaks you. And we are being told in these spiritual, timeless instructions that we can access the very power of God to be made strong and enabled to live that life. We are offered that power that allows us to choose to be good when we don't feel like it, to sacrifice, to make the extra effort, to keep our mouth shut when it needs to be shut. All those things that are oh so human. We can't do this all by ourselves. We're fragile, mortal, selfish people. But if we are made strong with the power of His mighty strength, then we are channeling Holy Spirit indwelling within us. That's a mighty destiny. That's a transforming destiny. That allows you to live and die in peace and joy. And may you be prepared to endure everything with patience. We spoke about that last week. So we'll let that one go. We've been there. But here's the follow-up, friends. Not only must we learn to endure with patience, which in itself is a gigantic effort, but he says, while joyfully giving thanks to the Father. In other words, we are actually told instructions now that we must learn to be happy and joyful when everything's wrong. Think about it. That is about as untypical as you can get. Our whole world is about not feeling that way. It's raining on my parade. I've got all this to complain about. It's too cold for me, like the universe did something against you or something. We are called to this unique genius teaching that it is possible to be happy when there's no reason to be happy. Can you imagine what that would do to your life? Can you imagine what kind of human being you would become? There are such people. Might be some people here who, despite all the trials and tribulations of life, all the defeats, all the injustices, and death itself, are joyful. My friends in Europe call it the sacrifice of joy. It is actually a spiritual discipline to be happy in spite of, because then you are truly dying to the old ways and living for the new ways. And it changes everything. Think of the last time you were someplace with other people and look at the faces around you. There's a lot of unhappy people. Impatient, unhappy, angry. It's a list that won't quit. Well, let me remind you that in this teaching, if you peek at Colossians 3, we are given a list of those kinds of instructions I was talking about, instructions that are specific to our lives and call us to not just be any old way. Hear this now. You've heard it before. The question is, have you lived it? But now you must rid yourself, that's pretty plain, isn't it, of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. You have taken off your old self with its practices and put on the new. This is serious business. This is spiritual discipline, spiritual warfare, and every one of us is called to it. None of us have any excuses. And please understand, that doesn't mean don't judge and condemn yourself if you slip, because everybody's going to slip. But if we're all trying for the same thing, we'll help each other up. We'll be able to forgive each other, to understand that we're all in the same boat, and to rise together to a state that is closer to what we are called to be. That is what church is about. And he goes on to say that He is the image of the invisible God. Incredible. The fullness of God is pleased to dwell in him. People don't quite know what to do with that. You've got your academics saying, oh, well, I've got a low Christology and all that sort of thing. The point is, Jesus of Nazareth, in his way of being, in his forgiveness of evil, while confronting it, in his forgiveness of the worst sins in order for them to go and sin no more, is the prototype of what every human being should be. This is the God-given example of who you are meant to be. I quoted Luther because sometimes that helps to hear from a familiar figure. We are meant to be the hidden mercy of God. Think about it. Imagine yourself as the hidden mercy of God. You seem normal, seem like the average person, but you're full of mercy, ready to help another. The world could use a few of those, don't you think? And all of this we hear at the end was to reconcile the world to himself. And I'll have to explain this, I'm sorry, by making peace through the blood of the cross. That is, again, so full of a Jewish background metaphor, of Paul's way of talking. Here's what I have to say to you about that, because it is such a travesty. The God of unconditional love did not need a blood sacrifice in order to reconcile us to himself. The blood of the cross is the decision that Jesus makes to go all the way into our human suffering, into all the injustices we endure, that we might know that the divine is with us, that blood is sacrificial love for your redemption. It isn't magic. It isn't satisfying a primitive God. It is showing total self-giving, total letting God through human form, so that he can say, forgive them for they know not what they do. And that is what we are meant to be. That is what we are after. That is the way we ought to follow, one step at a time. It can be done. It has been done. It will be done. Let us be the ones now, in this time and place, to live these teachings, this divine wisdom that makes us Christ-like, makes us God-pleasing, makes us alive and well in the light of God.